Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ann Artis, Director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Research Center of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I have the privilege as well as the pleasure of serving as Interim Deputy Provost this year. I want to welcome all of you to the fourth lecture in the Perspectives on Digital Humanities Lecture and Library Workshop series. This series is hosted by the Research Center's Digital Humanities Working Group in collaboration with several other units that play very critical roles in the delivery and development of digital pedagogy and research resources on this campus. So let me begin simply by acknowledging our partners in this enterprise. Susan Brinchison, Vice Provost and Mae Morris Director of the University of Delaware Library, has graciously allowed us to stage all of these events in the Morris Library, in addition to providing funding for this series. Paul Hyde, I saw him. Where did he go? Raise your hand. There he is. Hiding, as usual. Trying to be invisible. Paul Hyde, IT Academic Technology Services, and the staff of the library's Students Multimedia Design Center have very ably supported all of the workshops. And the College of Arts and Sciences and the English Department, John Ernest is here somewhere. George can't be here, but where's John? Yeah. Thank you, John, have supported this programming very generously as well. Let me offer, too, a bit of information about the series as a whole before I turn the platform over to Susan. The Digital Humanities Working Group has been meeting since last spring to talk about the transformations in scholarly communication practices that are underway in 21st century teaching and learning environments. We've been talking about issues of open access and the engagement of broader audiences that can be facilitated through digital platforms and social media. And we've put issues in graduate humanities education and the emergence of what's called Alt-AC, alternative academic careers, on our collective radar screens as we've considered how the new kinds of collaborations between IT staff, librarians, and academic departments are leveraging both new employment opportunities for humanities PhDs and innovative partnerships between university-based researchers, museums, foundations, and industry. Yes, even industry. This lecture series is the result of our shared interest in creating a series of teachable moments for this campus community regarding national and international conversations about these sorts of issues. And the accompanying workshop series is designed to give faculty and students opportunities to learn more about current University of Delaware resources in support of digital humanities research and teaching. We are very, very fortunate to have with us today Kenneth Cruz, Director of Columbia University's Copyright Advisory Office. Our snow event didn't manage to scare him or all of you away tonight, fortunately, and Susan Brinchison will now introduce him. Two housekeeping details really quickly before she comes up. Silence your cell phones. And there's a blue clipboard being passed around. If you're interested in being on the Digital Humanities mailing list, give us your name and email address. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Good afternoon, everyone. I also am delighted to welcome you to the Morris Library, where the main collection of the University of Delaware is housed. I am Susan Brinchison, Vice Provost for Libraries. Had to stop and think. I begin by saying Dr. Cruz, Dr. Brickhouse, University of Delaware students, faculty, friends, guests, again, welcome. And I'm so glad to see you here in spite of the weather. With all the RSVPs we've had then only 2 people who called and declined because of the weather. So, I too express appreciation to Dr. Kenneth Cruz for his willingness to spend time with us today. As Nancy Brickhouse has described, the presentation, Copyright and the Digital Humanities, is part of the and as Ann Artis has described, is part of the Perspectives on Digital Humanities, which is co-sponsored by the Interdisciplinary Humanities Research Center, the College of Arts and Sciences, and the University of Delaware Library. The digital humanities are important to the University of Delaware and its library, which has been involved with them for some time. An early example of the library involvement with digital humanities are the papers of the early 20th century diplomat George Messersmith, who was known in the field as the diplomat of democracy, and who served as a diplomat for the United States during the 1930s, in Hitler's Germany, at which he wrote long letters back to FDR, long onion skim, single-space typed letters back to FDR, describing life in the Nazi Germany and dinner with Hitler. The papers are one of, if not the most heavily used and in demand of all the collections of the University of Delaware Library. Even the BBC has been over to film them for a film they were doing on the Prince of Wales. So there was enormous demand for them to be digitized, and they were done so with a grant from NHPRC, which is the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. And so they are now digitized and available for anyone on the internet. Then I want to make an interesting footnote about the Messersmith papers. In his book, Erik Larson, sort of a really hot bestseller published within the last year, called In the Garden of Beasts, Erik Larson says the following in context. He says, at the University of Delaware Library in Newark, Delaware, I examined the papers of George Messersmith, one of the most beautifully archived collections I've ever come across. So that's really high praise. Yeah? Now it's my privilege to tell you about Dr. Kenneth Kruse, better known, I think, as Kenny. Perhaps he'll tell us. Dr. Kruse earned his undergraduate degree in history from Northwestern University and received his law degree from Washington University in St. Louis. He earned his graduate library degree and PhD from the UCLA School of Library and Information Science. From 1980 to 1990, Dr. Kruse practiced general business and corporate law in Los Angeles, primarily for the entertainment industry. He might have some stories to tell about that, too. During 2003, he was the intellectual property scholar for the Center for Intellectual Property and Copyright in the Digital Environment at the University of Maryland. Since its inception in 2003, he served as a faculty member for the Munich, Germany Intellectual Property Law Center, and he taught international copyright law in the LLM program in Cairo, Egypt in 2010. And this year, Dr. Kruse will teach a course at the Sorbonne. In 2005, the American Library Association awarded the first L. Ray Patterson Copyright Award to Dr. Kruse. Dr. Kruse is director of the Copyright Advisory Office at Columbia University. For more than 20 years, he has focused much of his research, policymaking, and teaching on copyright issues, and is especially expert in the analysis and application of fair use. He is a frequent speaker at universities and meetings throughout the world. He has served as an expert witness in a case that is well known in the library world of Georgia State University, very publicized case about library reserve issues. And the court found in favor of, very much in favor of libraries. And now the three publishers who are parties to the case are appealing the case. And I'm hoping Kenny can tell us about that if he's not still refrained by being an expert witness. Dr. Kruse has published widely in the fields of copyright and constitutional law, including his most recent book and very much acclaimed book, Copyright Law for Librarians and Educators. The third edition was published in 2012. He has compiled in 2008 a study for the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is an agency of the United Nations, a study in which he analyzed copyright statutes applicable to libraries in the laws of more than 150 countries. Dr. Kruse has not spoken before about the digital humanities as much as he speaks. And so we are fortunate today that he is going to give a keynote, brand new address about digital humanities, especially for us. Following his remarks, Dr. Kruse will respond to questions, and so now it is my great pleasure to present Dr. Kenneth Kruse, who will speak on copyright and the digital humanities. Kenny.
My goodness, that's a challenging introduction, and I thank you so much, and I thank all of you for being here. I deeply appreciate it. I deeply appreciate your taking the time, and I hope that you will have a lot of questions and that you'll challenge me. And there are stories I can tell. There are stories I can't tell. But I can tell you this: I have never had dinner with Adolf Hitler, not once, not once. However, just to prove that copyright is everywhere, there is a copyright story about Hitler, just in case you're interested. And it has to do with Senator Alan Cranston from California. He was senator for many years, and in his Cranston's early career, he was a journalist, and he was a journalist based overseas in Europe at the time of the rise of Hitler, and he reported back on this person Hitler and reported back with translations of Mein Kampf, and only to have the distinction of becoming a reporter and then member of Congress who was sued by Adolf Hitler for copyright infringement. How's that? How's that? That could be a badge of honor, that's for sure. And I thank you. I thank you, Susan, Ann, Kathy, everybody who's had a hand in making this visit possible. I thank you all very, very much. It's truly a privilege. I am going to indulge in a bit of digital humanities. For those of you who do work with digital humanities projects day in, day out, when I'm all done, you can tell me how wrong I really am. And so I will do my best to make some sense of it. I hope that in return, I can help make some sense of copyright, including a key word that I bet I say a few times during the presentation, and that is options. One of the things that I like to find in copyright are our options. What are the choices we have? Because one of the distinctive characteristics of copyright law is that while it does say here's the answer to this and here's the answer to that, very often these are answers that are just starting points. Very often we can strive to get other answers, and that the law gives us some flexibility to find those other answers. But we have to take the effort and we have to have the know-how to make those alternatives, those options, those choices possible. So part of my goal in working with copyright in the academic setting at all is reckoning with the law, finding the choices that it offers, and identifying the options that work best for us. What does that mean? Work best for our projects, our pursuits in the academic realm of our research, our teaching, our community service. And I think that what binds us together in that pursuit is a quest for the expansion of knowledge and the sharing out of knowledge. And so in a way that takes me to the subtitle that I kind of tossed onto my slide at one of my last thoughts in putting this together, is descriptive title about copyright in the digital humanities. But I realized that some of the words that I was beginning to use in articulating concepts had a nice alliteration to them, and put it this way: sources and sourcing. And this is going to have to do with authorship. Scrambling, alterations, derivatives, innovative new works that are built upon others. In the copyright sense, you'll hear me talk about derivative works, new works based upon others, and sharing. How do we network our findings out? How do we network other people's innovation in? And so sharing, or to put it in legal terms, distributions. because we're engaged in a digital world where just the nature of digital communication and digital technology is we are constantly reproducing works and constantly distributing them out. That's what the network does. That's its main purpose. And yet it runs right up against copyright law. Because copyright law says, well, wait a minute, maybe you're not supposed to be doing those things. And so what do we have? What are we going to be talking about here? Are we talking about a clash with copyright? Are we talking about testing some of these rules of copyright? Because I really invite you, in fact, I'd be shocked if you didn't do this at various times during my presentation. Say to yourself, what in the world is he trying to say? You know, if the law does that, I'm out of business. My project is dead. You should be saying that. You should be saying that. Because we're here to test projects. We're here to test the law. And then ultimately, we're going to find that the law just doesn't work. There are going to be times when you're going to ask me a question or I'm going to suggest something on a slide, and we're all just going to know that the subtext is, well, that's not going to work, is it? And so we're going to struggle with that. But very often we deal with the kind of awkwardness and the impossibilities and the dysfunctionality of the law by ignoring it. But ignorance really isn't bliss. Or is it? You know? You know, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. There should be a little bit at the end of the day where you say to yourself, wow, I'm really glad I went. That was exciting and interesting. I learned something. And then there should be this other little voice inside of you saying, I wish I hadn't learned that. Now I'm going to think about it, you know? And it might just be something that you have to struggle with. But that's okay, because, that key word again, we might figure out our options and might figure out what we have to do. So let me indulge a little bit in digital humanities. Think about your projects. I went out scouring, looking at projects that I've seen before, that I find very interesting, and that reveal different things, different lessons about copyright. So I gathered a few of them to share today. I think about projects that I have had some involvement in, a project involving data mining from course syllabi in order to find trends in readings and learning and other kinds of experiences in the educational environment. Another project involving crowdsourcing a very rare language and historical language and looking at it geographically across a map and looking at it chronologically over time, and how we use digital technologies to interface with our social science, our humanities, our other just traditionally non-digital or non-technological areas of study. So in some respects, that's really what digital humanities is. And so let's take a look at some of these. Some of these we'll look at briefly here. The Shakespeare machine. Oh, that's a lot of fun. Or text mining from novels involving massive downloading and analyzing the text. The Hypermedia Dante project with images and text and connections and links and exploration. And the do-it-yourself history. A really cool study. There are many like it out there, but a chance to crowdsource historical documents. So the Shakespeare machine, not really meant to be an academic study at all, but it sure functions like one. It's a work of art. It's a chandelier hanging in a theater, and where the text of Shakespeare plays downloaded, stored, analyzed, and then those fans, if you can see them on the screen, those are digital screens, long and narrow, and the computer is capturing patterns of words from the Shakespeare texts and displaying the common patterns of words onto these fans. So it becomes its own work of art as much as it becomes a textual humanities study. Or how about data mining into massive downloads of text mining into 19th century novels? And the quotation at the bottom of the slide, the frequency of, this bar graph, don't pretend like you can read it, just imagine what it's telling you, is the frequency of 13 pronouns pulled out of a corpus of about 3,500 19th century novels. And so the bar graph breaks down pronoun usage by author gender. How do authors of different genders use different pronouns and looking at different patterns? In order to do this study, we're talking about massive downloading of thousands of full-text works in order to analyze and learn the patterns and usages of language by means of deploying the technology. And the Hypermedia Dante project, filled with maps and images and visualizations and texts, all with links and connections and explanations, so that the scholar studying Dante has the benefit of technology to better understand different views and different ways of working with the text. Do-it-yourself history project, a rich variety of historical documents, and if you've ever had the pleasure of looking at these wonderful archives and pulling out those 18th, 19th, 20th century documents that are in somebody's handwriting, and the handwriting is beautiful but it's dated, or the paper is deteriorated, or the handwriting isn't so beautiful in the first place. And this becomes a way of crowdsourcing that text. So at the University of Iowa, it's simply digitizing nicely, clearly the text images themselves. And then at the bottom of the page is a space where, as a user, you can begin to enter a transcription, so that we are all getting the benefit of different interested people taking the time to do it. Now, it's also hazardous, because I thought, well, does this include me? And I moved my cursor into the box, and sure enough, I could just cause all sorts of trouble. And I could change the text, because it isn't a login. It's very much a Wikipedia kind of approach to gathering this information. But it's still fundamentally what we tend to think of when we think of, at least certainly what I think of, about digital humanities. It is this interface of technology and humanities, so that we can do things, we can learn things, we can find things, we can discover things, we can share things, we can network things in a way that we never could before. And all of these become examples. You think back through all of this. We're talking about full text to be able to do the analysis. We're talking about massive downloads. We're talking about images and artwork and maps and other kinds of things. We're talking about private correspondence covering different span of years. All of those things, those texts, those books, those maps, those artwork, the private letters, all of those things, including the websites, including the software behind it, including the graphic bars across the top, and including my PowerPoint slides that illustrate this and present it to you, all of these things are within the realm of copyright. And many of the things that I just listed, big hint, the ones that aren't are the really old ones, but many of the things that I just listed are in fact protected by copyright. That's just the way the law works. So we're doing these initiatives in the context of a copyright law that applies sweepingly in its reach, in its scope, in the rights that it vests, and in the incredible number of years that the law extends. So what are some elements of the digital humanities projects? I don't know. These are just some of my thoughts, and I've had the benefit of sharing ideas with my colleagues at my home university, Alex Gill, Barbara Rockenbach, other good colleagues, where we share ideas on these issues. But Common elements of a project: technology, we've said that over and over again, often multiple participants, cross-disciplinary approaches, analysis, tools, resources. Quantitative, I suppose I could have also said qualitative analysis, but the quantitative analysis is definitely bringing new methodologies and new approaches to the humanities, and those innovations in the methodologies that we're using. Some thoughts about elements of those methodologies. There is the creation of new works. I know that sounds incredibly obvious, but look at how differently we're creating new works. The new transcriptions, the crowdsourcing, the depth and multiple layers of time and geography added to concepts of language. And other elements of the methodology: digitization of existing works, creating new versions or new copies even of an existing work, and the mass downloading. Because often to do these text mining or data mining projects, the question comes up, I hear this question repeatedly, can I download 10,000 articles out of this database that we have access to in the library? Have you heard this question before? Yeah. And of course, we all know the answer is yes, isn't it? No? We'll get back to that. You can maybe edit that out. I don't know. But also in terms of methodology is storage and facilitating retrieval of this information, and specifically storing and retrieving in a way that serves this part of the methodology of networking and collaboration with our other peers, with our colleagues, or with the public, whoever went to that website and started typing. And in the midst of all of that, it was really, really hard for somebody like me, a copyright person, where I just see copyright everywhere. There's copyright on all those things I listed. There's copyright on the labels on the wine bottles over there. There's copyright on the images on the wall. There's copyright on the notes that you're taking right now. There's copyright on the patterns on our ties and clothes and everything. There's just copyright everywhere. So it's really hard for me to read a list like this without reciting it in copyright terms, and now I get to do that because this next slide is saying, all right, now let's begin to look at this through that copyright lens. Because what we're talking about with these tools and these methodologies is we are creating new works. Most of the works that we are creating indeed have qualifications, are qualified for protectability. And so we have questions that if it is protected, who is the owner? Because the law does that. The law gives instant automatic protection and declares somebody to be the owner even if you don't know it, even if you don't want it. The law gives it to you anyway. More about that coming up. And that as we manipulate and alter the works and create new works out of existing material, what the law says about that, those are derivative works. And that is also one of the rights of a copyright owner. And then all those concepts of downloading, uploading, storing, retrieving, sharing, networking, all of those things are further acts of reproduction of the work. Push the button to send something out, it gets reproduced multiple times along the chain of this network. And then it's also electronically distributed from point A to points B, C, D, and E, and so on. So from a copyright perspective, I can look at these activities and these methodologies and these approaches that are part of digital humanities, and I just see potential, possible copyright violations written all over every one of these projects. And at this point, you want to say, get him out of the room fast, because he's going to tell us stuff we don't want to hear. I'll get to some good news. Don't worry. So because what the law does is it establishes fundamentally, it establishes rights, it grants protection for new works, it establishes rights, vests those in an owner, a copyright owner, and then it establishes a set of rights. As the copyright owner, we are all copyright owners. As a copyright owner, we don't have all rights in that work. We have the rights that the law gives us. And the basic rights are, there's a little bit more than this, but the basic rights are the right of reproduction of the work in copies. You're making copies of something, come see me. The right of distribution of the work to the public. You're going to hand out those copies to some group that might be defined as the public, come see me. Derivative works. So you're going to make variations, updates, new versions, ancillary products based upon my existing work, come see me. Those are derivatives. And public display of the work, just showing it to a group. This group assembled could easily constitute the public, showing something on the screen, therefore becomes a public display. Or reading it. I read a sentence off the bottom of a slide. That was somebody else's sentence. I, by just reading it in simple terms, have made a performance of it. And if you're the public, I just made a public performance of somebody else's sentence. And those pictures, I'm displaying them, a public display of somebody else's pictures. So we run up against copyright possible violations all the time. But the saving grace is in the limitations and exceptions. And there are two that I hope we'll spend most of our time on. One is fair use, the one we hear about most often, and there are others. And the other limit on copyright is the duration, because copyrights live on for many years, but they eventually expire. And when the copyright expires, the work goes into the public domain. And what does that mean? It means, at least for copyright purposes, there are no more legal restraints on using that particular work. And so I think I've gotten to most of the concepts on this slide already, because if you think back to those elements, we have all these questions about what's protected, who's the owner, am I using it in a way that it's infringement, and as we're going to spend a good amount of time, is my activity within fair use, even though it may superficially look like it could violate the rights. And so here's another way that I outline the structure of the law. That if somebody comes to me, and the way I get questions, as you can well imagine, somebody will come to me with a picture that they want to put in a project, and the question is usually, is my use of this work a fair use? I get variations on that question quite often. But very often the better question is earlier, because fair use, as you can see on this slide, is way at the bottom. Much higher on the list, I'm hoping you can see it from all the way in the back of the room, much higher on the list are some more fundamental questions. Is it protectable at all? Am I using it in a way that violates the rights? Is the copyright on this expired? Let's get into some nitty-gritty. Here's my short version of a semester-long course on copyright law, boiled down to just a couple of slides. For works to be eligible, just eligible for copyright protection, they have to have these two qualities. They must be original works of authorship. Now that's actually a pretty easy standard to pass. Original means it came from me, it originated from me, it didn't copy it from someplace else. And what the courts have also said is it implies some minimum level of creativity. So it doesn't take much. So outlining those simple truths from this copyright statute, there's not much creativity in that. So, and the concepts and a lot of the words came straight out of the statute, so there's not much on those few lines that I can claim copyright to. But if I start writing paragraphs that explain it, even though my paragraphs are really factual and nothing more than that, but they explain it, now we're on our way to originality, easily on our way. And then once it's fixed in a tangible medium, written on paper, recorded into the camera, saved to the drive of my computer, it is fixed in a tangible medium, I get, next bullet point, instant automatic copyright protection. There's no requirement to do anything, know anything, or want anything. Instant automatic copyright protection. So I found some of those pictures out on the web, and maybe if I looked real closely at the website, there wouldn't have been any statement that said copyright 2012 or 13 by me, no claim of copyright. Question, is it protectable by copyright? Answer, probably, because it happens instantly and automatically. But very important for our scholarly work and our digital humanities work, and very important for a lot of the example projects I showed you, are the exclusions and limitations and exceptions. Let me talk about two of those that are very helpful in a lot of our academic work. One is just by law. Congress makes copyright law. Let me start with that. And so what Congress chose, and they could have chosen otherwise, but Congress said that works that are created by the U.S. government, works created by the U.S. government, by officers and employees of the U.S. government, those are exempt from copyright protection. So they're excluded from the realm of protection. So if you're doing data mining into congressional reports, you've got a huge advantage over somebody who's doing data mining into 20th century novels, because you're dealing with materials that are excluded from protection and are in the public domain. The other enormous category that goes straight to a lot of the examples that I gave you, expired copyrights. So those 19th century novels that are downloaded, they're old enough. They're probably, we can rest assured, and it would be an unusual example that's not that is protected, that those works are in the public domain. Yeah, I got two rules up here that probably cover 90+% of the situations you would encounter. One, is it published in the United States before 1923? Then the work, enough years have gone by, that work is in the public domain. And the second rule, if it's unpublished material, like that do-it-yourself history and the Messerschmitt letters, and so, of course, those are government documents, aren't they? But the do-it-yourself history with the manuscripts that have never been published before, if the author has been dead for more than 70 years, then the copyright enters the public domain. That probably covers 90% of our different situations. And then there are some more exotic, esoteric, but real rules that fill in a lot of complications. Let's talk a little bit about ownership. Once we have a work that is protected, who is the owner? Well, the top line really answers, again, 90% of our likely situations. Basic rule, if you're the author, if you're the one who wrote those paragraphs, took that picture, wrote those lines of code, you own the copyright. And then there are a couple of important variations. One is work made for hire. If I created it in my capacity as an employee, as part of my job, then the copyright belongs to the employer. But for digital humanities, a very important variation on this basic rule is joint ownership. If you and I co-author an article, we are joint copyright owners, and we share in the ownership together. But what happens when 30 of us in a class work on a project together? What happens when we put it online and 300 unknown people log in and contribute at different times? What happens then? Well, if you want an answer, the legal answer is, well, it looks like maybe 300 of you are joint copyright owners. Good luck managing that process. So, back to my opening point about options. Starting in here especially, we're going to begin to see some options for how we might manage our projects to avoid copyright headaches. So at this point, begin to think about, if I'm going to crowdsource something or do something with a large group, how might we either come to an agreement about how we're going to manage this, Or how might we put ownership together with some of these other notions about this instant automatic rights to decide as a group that we're going to give up some rights? Creative Commons. We're going to go online. We're going to let the world have it. And we're not going to worry about owning it. But to move away from the default bundle of rules that I'm showing you up here on slides, we need to now know something. We need to do something. And so to get a better result, to find the better option, we have to take the time and we have to care and effect that better result. Otherwise, we're back to some unpleasantries of where the law is taking us. And so let me get to the next part of what the law does. And this is the whole set of different exceptions. Now, my reason for this screen is to make one big point, or maybe two or maybe three. Let's see how it goes. And the one big point that's clear from this screen is at the top, the very first bullet point, whether you can read it or not from the back of the room, the very first bullet point says Section 107 fair use. That Section 107 refers to the statute number inside the U.S. Copyright Act. So if I get my book of Copyright Act and I turn to it, actually I don't, I have it downloaded, I'm not making this up, on my iPhone. So we can, go to it that way. But if you turn to Section 107, you'll see the fair use statute. And it's very brief. On a standard type page, it only fills about half a page. It's not a very long or, on paper, a very complicated statute. But then right after it, after 107 comes 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, all the way up through 122. And what these are different statutes that create different exceptions that apply in different ways to different uses of copyrighted works. And most of them are highly detailed and highly specific. Most of them go on for pages. And the newer ones about sound recordings and music industry and so on, they go on for about 20 pages because all these lawyer lobbyists in Washington got together and they all had to get their piece of their concern into the statute, and Congress said, we can't figure it out either, so you draft it for us and then tell us when to vote, and we will, and we're done. And so that's how we're making law these days. And so the upshot is we have a long list of statutes, and a handful of them are very important to us in the educational world. There's a specific statute that says lets libraries make limited copies under limited circumstances. There's a specific statute about showing, displaying, and performing, singing a song, showing the movie, working through the art history slide set in the live face-to-face classroom. It becomes much more rigid and narrow in distance learning. And so we have a number of different statutes that are very, very important to us. Second point, though, first point was that fair use is just one of many exceptions. Second main point, those other exceptions are highly detailed, narrowly applied. If you fit inside what they specify, great, full speed ahead. But if you don't fit, my circumstance is like this and I don't quite fit, you can always next turn to fair use. So now be careful. I didn't just say, therefore it is fair use. What I said is, you get one more chance to see if it might be fair use. And so fair use becomes kind of a catch-all to see if some activity might apply. And if we were to put the full text of the fair use statute up on the screen, we would see at the center of it a statement that says, in determining whether the use of a work in any specific situation is a fair use, the factors to be considered shall include. Factors consider shall include. In reality, what courts do is they look at these four factors coming right up, and they look only at those. It's a rare case that looks at something else. They look at those four factors, give them meaning, and weigh them in the balance. On the whole, do they lean in this way or do they lean that way? And what are those 4 factors? 1, what's my purpose? My purpose of my use. And the statute tells us that nonprofit education is generally favored. And the statute tells us in plain language that fair use is for purposes such as teaching, research, education, scholarship, just like our digital humanities projects, right? And case law has told us that if the use is transformative, that's going to help your argument considerably. Second, the nature of the work. Different works get different levels of protection. The amount you're using. There are different rules here, but the simplest one is the more you're using, the less likely it's fair use. And then the last factor, effect. What's the effect on the market? Let me give you a couple quick examples to put this in context. Here's a case that involves the use of unpublished historical manuscripts in the context of a scholarly analysis, very much like we begin to do with a lot of our digital humanities works. And here came the lawsuit by the estate of this well-known author from the 1940s, bringing this lawsuit against somebody using these materials. And the court said, all right, let's look at those 4 factors. The first factor is going to weigh in favor of fair use, scholarly, academic, research kind of use, and transformative. Because you're taking the paragraphs and moving them from the context of being a story told in a novel into a scholarly analytical piece. The nature of the work, second factor. Well, the court said we got a long line of cases that tell us unpublished works get more protection. So that tends to weigh against fair use. And the amount. The court did not get rigid with this. Said, how much do you need to realistically serve your academic, educational, scholarly purpose? Oh, we don't think it's too much. That weighs in favor of fair use. And the effect on the market. In this case, because it's excerpts from an unpublished novel, and the owner of the copyright, the estate that inherited the rights, said, well, we're planning to publish this, and this is going to take away some of our readers. And the court said, actually, no. We think this might actually help you bring more readers in and draw more attention to this work. So looking back on the 4 factors, only that nature of the work weighed against, the other 3 in favor, it's starting to look like fair use, which is what the court ruled. Or how about this one? Any deadheads in the group? Yeah, all right, all right. This is you're going to want to buy this on Amazon. It's in the used book pile. This is a whole coffee table book, a big thick book, all about the Grateful Dead. We all want a copy. I bought mine. And the lawsuit involves Bill Graham Archives. Bill Graham, not Billy Graham, Bill Graham, the founder of Fillmore East, Fillmore West. Is this all making sense to you? Is this ancient history? Brings a lawsuit against DK Publishing, very respected, established publisher, over the use of some of those 1960s, 70s rock and roll posters. And if you can see the picture, that little dark square in the center, the rectangle in the center, that's one of those posters, and that's what it looks like on the layout of the page. And the court said, you know what, this is fair use. It may be the whole thing when it comes to the amount, but these are images that are in small size, thumbnail, low resolution, may actually be helping the market, and it's an important part of telling the historical episodes of the history of music in the United States. And so the court said this is the kind of use that is fair use. So think back to our digital humanities projects about how we might use some of those materials and how we might be judged in our uses about whether it's fair use. Our purpose, nonprofit education, scholarship, research, also, I should add, highly transformative in many cases. Not only are we moving it out of context, we're manipulating it, we're doing data mining, we're really transforming the use of a lot of that material. The nature of the work may be the hardest to judge in a general case because we'd have to look at exactly what it is. Courts tend to be more protective of unpublished works, and they also tend to be more protective of highly creative artistic works. So we have to judge what the work is. The amount, courts have really tried, Georgia State case went back at it, but most courts have tried to get away from a quantitative measure and just look at what's really reasonably necessary to get the job done. And then effect on the market. Very important factor, maybe not the most important, but we have to stop and consider what is the real market for this work. So part of the database download example, can I download these 10,000 articles? There are all sorts of other problems of licensing and so on that go with that question. But part of what the rights holders are going to be thinking will be, where are those articles going to end up after you download them? How might that get loose, affect my market, undermine people coming back to the database, and undermine future sales? And that's an important part of the evaluation of fair use. So we go back to some of those specific examples. And as I think back about the Shakespeare machine or 19th century novels or any of those specific examples, I start to feel a little better about them. Well, it happens to be that a number of them are about public domain materials, 19th century works, 16th century, 17th century, 15th century, 16th century, there we go, Shakespeare works. And what's a century? And the Dante works. Some of the works in the Dante, the hypermedia Dante, are in fact relatively new. So we're going to have to evaluate those differently. But a lot of the material from the Dante project are in fact really early works. And the do-it-yourself history, at least the few examples that I browsed through, a lot of those are 19th century manuscript letters, presumably never been published at any point, and therefore highly likely that the authors died much longer than 70 years ago. So we're looking at a lot of works that are in the public domain. But we're also looking at taking then the public domain and doing something with it, creating derivatives, not a violation if it's public domain, but what we're doing with it may involve the intellectual original contributions from other people, from our colleagues, from our researchers, from the public, adding to the work, crowdsourcing the work. And now we have questions of ownership and control and rights and so on. And then we have questions of fair use about the modern material that we're including in some of these projects. So my broader lesson in looking at these that I want to be sure to leave with you is a lesson of taking control, becoming actively involved with this relationship of copyright to our digital humanities and other scholarly work. For starters, take control of ownership. Take control of ownership of your work that you are creating. How do you want somebody else to use your work so that the works that you are creating today can be used by the digital humanities or other scholar in the future? How might you choose to take some of your works and dedicate them to the public domain, which is, under the law, kind of a dicey thing to do. It's not really clear it works. But it is pretty clear that you can use Creative Commons licensing, which grants a broad swath of public rights out to the unknown users who are going to want to appreciate your work now and on into the future. Engage in open access publishing. And engage in, when you have collaborative projects with colleagues, whoever they may be, enter into agreements. They don't have to be long, they don't have to be complex, you don't have to hire a lawyer. Just have reasonable, good, honest, good faith statement of what the group of you expects from this project. Who's going to have what say over how we manage it? Who's going to make the decisions? Are we going to give it up? And if you're going to put it on the web where it's going to be crowdsourced, come to some basic, simple understandings that you put online with the project so that your users understand the rules of what they are contributing to. And so that they have less right to come back to you in the future and object to some way that this project might be used in the future. No, you made that clear up front, that you are donating your contributions in effect. Take control of fair use. Now we're talking about somebody else's copyrighted work that we want to use in our projects. We can't overestimate the importance of fair use in our work. And so we need to keep going back to those 4 factors, because by working with those 4 factors, we can really better understand the versatility, the flexibility, the adaptability of fair use to meet changing needs and different kinds of materials and different circumstances. And as an institution, either at the top level or just right in your office for the way you're going to manage different types of projects, have a written statement of policy about your standard and your understanding of fair use. And if you're doing it at the institutional level, implement an educational program. I will add this about the Georgia State case too. One of the pieces of evidence that clearly impressed the judge was the written policy, the clear explanations, even if somebody else could nitpick whatever else was done, having some guidance, having some explanation, having some oversight, having some place where faculty and others can bring their questions, and having the educational program where members of the university community could learn more about fair use. All of that goes far in developing a reasoned, defensible, responsible policy. And then keep your options open. When I get those questions about, is it fair use to use this picture? Sometimes my answer is, I don't know. Let's go find a different picture so we don't have to think about fair use. Let's go find a picture that's older, that's in the public domain, that's from another source, that comes with permission, that has Creative Commons. If you go out to Flickr.com, I can find you 1,000,000 pictures of the Eiffel Tower. I don't know why we need to worry about this one. So we need to look at our different options as well as the other statutory exceptions. And so let me leave you with a few bits of general advice. Accept uncertainty. If in the world of copyright on a lot of these issues, especially fair use, if you're looking for answers that will answer all of your future questions, you may be doing harm to yourself and to the doctrine. Uncertainty is a natural part of fair use, and it's that uncertainty that keeps the law adaptable to those changing needs. Accept uncertainty. The question is not what's the answer. The question is, where is your comfort zone in moving forward in a responsible manner? Keep your focus on scholarship. Absolutely, we need to understand the economic issues, the interests of the other parties who are affected. Absolutely. We're living in an interwoven world where we need to understand and appreciate it. We need to see issues from different perspectives. But as a university, we need to keep our focus on how do we best advance scholarship and manage your own copyrights. Don't be part of the problem. One of the problems with the use of copyrighted works and the struggle over fair use by academics is that other academics have created that work and have given away their copyrights to somebody whose interests are not aligned with ours. And now we set up the tension. So be respectful of your own copyrights. Don't give them away. Support open access publishing where appropriate for different kinds of works. Consider a Creative Commons license where appropriate, and then map out the copyright issues and make a plan for your digital humanities project. Because as we go into this big unknown future, copyright's not going to disappear. Well, maybe it will, but I'm not betting on it. It'll exist in one form or another. But our digital humanities demand and experimentation will continue. The tension between academic pursuits and the law will only continue and be exacerbated. And therefore, the importance of your taking control will become greater and greater and greater. And I thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Kenny, can you talk a little bit about Creative Commons licensing and the various flavors thereof?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit. There's an awful lot. CreativeCommons.org, of course, is the website. And the concept of Creative Commons is the concept of saying, I created this work, I wrote this paper or whatever it is, and I own the copyright, and I hereby choose to license in advance certain uses to various people. Now, I could do that very narrowly. I could say, you know, only to people at the University of Delaware and only for this purpose. I could do that. Or only for you by name. I could always do that. But Creative Commons is a way of saying, for example, I choose the Creative Commons option, as I have done on some of my work, that to the public, I hereby license permission to use this work, interpret use very broadly, with, say, these limitations. I choose the option that says I want attribution. So now if you're going to use that work, I want some credit back. I want attribution. And then maybe I'll look at it and say, and I want to limit it to non-commercial. So that if you're looking to use it for some commercial purpose, it's not excluding that, but it means just come back and find me. I'm just not giving you that in advance. And then on certain works, I might look at it and choose the other option that says no derivatives. So that if you want to make variations on this project, come back and find me. Now, sometimes I've chosen those options, the kind of, here's a broad permission, but it's not everything. Because honestly, I'm pretty easy to find. And so if somebody wants to track me down for permission, they can find me, I answer my email, and we'll get it taken care of. For somebody who just wants to put that project away and move on with the rest of their life, it's not their thing, you might want to give broader permission up front. And so you think about the reality of the different options, what works for you, what's appropriate for that particular work, and look at your different choices. It's a really nice system, and then if you go to the website, you can get those nice logos, and you can get clear statements that you can append to a work and share it out. And if the work is right for it and it works for you, I encourage you to do it. Does that help? Great. Questions? Am I going to call on people, or are we going to? It's okay. Who's got a microphone? Somebody's. Oh, okay, I'll tell you what. Just wave a microphone, then I'll know where you are. Go right ahead.
I was working with a student recently who had some questions about a dissertation she was working on and wanted to use some film clips, stills in it. And it seemed like a very good argument for fair use, but looking at some of the conditions that ProQuest has for distributing their dissertations,
right,
they have a much stricter requirement for licensing and permissions, even when there might be a fair use, assessment to be made there. How do you see the role of academics as negotiating that, or should we be trying to do something in that area, or how should that be addressed?
You definitely should be addressing it, and I'll preface this by saying, in the interest of disclosure, I've written some of the copyright advisory material that's on the ProQuest website. And so, but I'm not part of ProQuest, and I have independence. You're raising ProQuest also gets to the question I was going to ask you, which goes with a lot of these is it fair use kind of scenarios. What do you plan to do with it? And in your case, let me tell you exactly what I mean by that. We could look at a dissertation. And if the question were this simple, is it fair use to include this item? Film clip, song lyrics, photograph, pick anything. Is it fair use to include that item? The fact that I'm eager to pin down is not only all the facts about the dissertation and the specific item, but what do you plan to do with that thesis, with that dissertation? If it's going to go like the good old days, bad old days, it's going to go no place but the office of the department, and there's just one copy on the shelf someplace, or take it one step up, the one copy that probably went onto the shelf of the library someplace, and that was it. Under those circumstances, it's a good chance just about anything you put in there is fair use. If we're talking single copy, isolated access, and that's it. But, you know, long ago, we started pushing all of this out to ProQuest. UMI was operated under different names at different times. Well, ProQuest is in a little different position because ProQuest is now making broader, call it public, access to this database or to this dissertation. So it's no longer the one paper copy on the shelf upstairs in the library. It's now going out on some other retrieval system that used to be microfilm, now is online, and is accessible by an indefinitely large number of people around the country and around the world. The fair use equation starts to become very different. Now take it another step. The university says, tell me if you're doing this here, you must submit your dissertation in digital form. I see lots of heads nodding. Okay, let me know if I'm on the right track with this next half too. And it will be put into the university repository. Not yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. Okay, notice what's happening. It's the what are you going to do with it starts to become one of the most important questions we could be asking. Because as we expand out the access, then we start to, then the question of what is fair use becomes a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter and a little bit tighter. And then you remember when we were talking about fair use, I said something about, well, you know, what's your comfort zone? I could have said that in other ways. What's your tolerance of uncertainty? What's your tolerance of risk? And you know, if we put it that way, we're all going to answer that question in a different way. Just watch how people cross the street. Some people just, you know, blindly, they're text messaging as they go across the street, and the next person will wait until there isn't a car in sight. We all have different levels of risk that we're ready to absorb. So you have to ask, if you're the graduate student, how much risk can I accept having that piece, that object in my dissertation? And it's probably, you can probably tolerate a lot. It's going to go nowhere. It's going to maybe it goes the next step to the library and that's it. But how much can you tolerate if you are ProQuest in the business of earning revenue by providing access to dissertations and thousands and millions of them with all of these embedded objects? Now you start to see the issues a little differently. Now you're going to have to develop a very different standard. And then what about when you expand your repository? You're going to have to decide, how much can I absorb here? What risks are we as an institution ready to accept? Many institutions are pulling way back. Many other institutions are saying, just put it all in and let's see who complains. And there are relatively few complaints. But there are different approaches that different institutions have taken. And I would say that's going to involve some policy-making soul-searching by the University of Delaware when you expand that repository. We've had to do it everywhere. Does that help in the meantime? Thanks. Question? Yes, please.
Hey, Jordan Howell, English Department.
Thank you.
So, Authors Guild versus How Do You Trust last
Yes.
year
Yes.
basically said that expression is under copyright, but the
True.
information contained in that expression is not.
True.
So I'm thinking of one classic example of a library book that there are hundreds of them here probably. That's just information, and that would be bibliographies. Is any of the information other than maybe the preface in a bibliography can that be copyrighted, or could I just start copying all of that information about book collation and whatnot, put it on the internet, and not have to worry a bit?
Really good question. Really good question. And let me get to a couple pieces of it, actually, say a little bit more. The Hathi Trust case, Hathi, H-A-T-H-I, Hathi Trust case, involved Authors Guild as copyright owners, brought a lawsuit against Hathi Trust. What is Hathi Trust? It's an initiative at the University of Michigan that is a repository of the full digitized text of millions of books, millions of which are still under copyright protection. And where most of those books come from, they're the files that were given back to the libraries as part of the Google Books project. Library shipped off books, Google scanned, sent hard copy books back to the library, and sent a copy of the digital file as part of the deal. Those digital files are being pooled into what's called Hathi Trust, and it's an enormously valuable resource. But you can imagine, if you see it from a different perspective, hey, wait a minute, there are 10 million or whatever number of books that I and my members own the copyrights to, and look what they're doing. And they're providing access in a very limited way, albeit, but still, that's our material. And so the court, at least the district court, ruled last year that that was within fair use for a variety of reasons. Now, along the way is an issue that the court, and I know some of the amicus briefs filed by Digital Humanities Group, making the argument that the use, the storage as an electronic file of the book for purposes of researching with the methodologies of text mining and data mining is a use of the facts and information in the book and not a use of the expression. This is tough. This is tough because that's a really, really good argument and a very important argument to make, and frankly one that I think the court rather liked. But it's what makes it difficult, and what's going to be a challenge on appeal, maybe it'll be upheld on appeal, but it's still going to be tough, is that in order to get, well, let me put it this way. You remember one of that bar graph that was up on the screen about the different pronouns used by different authors? That's a fact. If you're asking the question, how often did Mark Twain use different pronouns? Those are facts. But in order to get to those unprotectable facts, I would have to load into the computer the full text of the book. And the full text of the book includes the protectable expression that's in the book. So you can see the lines get blurred. The lines get blurred. And I'm hoping that the Court on Appeal will understand these issues in the way that we're seeing them here. But you can see how legally it's a tough sell because these are very, very new ways of looking at the work. And then you combine that with the concern that the rights holders have, and which will be, I'm not worried about your pronouns and your study of pronouns. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm worried about the simple fact that you're digitizing 10 million of my books, you're putting them in a database, and I have no control over it, and I don't know who's going to break in and what's going to happen to those in the future, and am I going to lose everything I own because of your security measures? That's what they're worried about. That's what they're worried about. And you can see how the line between this kind of use and that kind of use is very, very blurry. So this is a new way of looking at copyright. It's a new way of looking at copyrighted works, and new stuff is a hard sell in the judicial system. Great. How are we doing?
We're just fine.
Good.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Lovely.
I think I'm taking a break, and I thank you so much.
Teddy Roosevelt said that far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. Will you join me in thanking Kenny Cruz for his hard work at work worth doing?
Thank you. My thanks to you.
I invite everyone to join us in the reception in the adjacent area. And would you wait just a moment for Kenny and me to go over there and get in place?
And I really want to thank all of you again. There's so many people here I wish to thank. And I can't help but add that I have given talks all over the country and outside the country, and I have never given a talk in the state of Delaware until today. And so I'm excited, and I thank you.
And where are you going tomorrow?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm going to mark off a new state next week. I have never given a talk in the state of Nevada. And I'm giving a copyright talk in Nevada next week. So I'll be doing that.
And
in 1 month.
Tomorrow is winter tour. He's going to.
Oh, yes,
visit
I
winter.
am, to winter tour. And so I'm on my way to 50. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us. Come on over here.